Echoes in the dark Dr. Minho Park floated in the observation deck of the research ship Sebyok, staring at the strange object ahead. The metal structure hung in the darkness between galaxies like a broken toy. It was bigger than any space station humans had ever built. Its surface was black and silver, covered in patterns that hurt his eyes to look at. "Captain Kim, are you seeing this?" Minho spoke into his comm device. "Captain Yunji." Kim's voice crackled back. "I see it, Doctor. My sensors can't figure out what it's made of. The metal is older than anything in our databases." Minho pressed his face against the window. The station had holes burned through its sides. Long scorch marks ran across its surface like scars. But the damage was wrong somehow. The burn patterns didn't match any weapons humans knew about. "Jiwan, what do your computers say about this thing?" Yunji asked over the ship's speaker system. Jiwan Li sat in the data analysis room, her fingers dancing over holographic displays. She was the ship's quantum historian, which meant she could pull information from broken computers and destroyed records. Her job was to find lost history. "The quantum signature is strange," Jiwan said slowly. "This station is about 800 years old. But, Captain, there's something else. The metal contains elements that don't exist anymore. Not just rare. Completely gone from the universe." Taehyun Choi looked up from his computer terminal. As the ship's AI specialist, he spent most of his time talking to machines. "The station's computers are still working," he announced. "Barely, but they're active. They're broadcasting something." "What kind of signal?" Yunji asked. "It's a word, just one word repeated over and over. But it's in old Earth languages. Korean, English, Chinese, others. The word is forgive in all of them." Minho felt a chill run down his spine. A station this advanced, broadcasting forgive for 800 years. The Sebyok moved closer to the massive structure. Through the observation windows, they could see inside through the holes in the hull. The interior glowed with a soft blue light. Strange crystals lined the walls, still pulsing with energy after all these years. "Captain, I'm picking up safe atmosphere inside," reported their pilot. "We can dock and explore." Yunji made her decision. "Quickly. Prep the shuttle. Minho, Jiwon, Taehyun, you're with me. Full environmental suits, even if the air is breathable. We don't know what we're walking into." An hour later, the four humans floated through the docking bay of the alien station. Their magnetic boots clanked against the metal floor as artificial gravity took hold. The walls were covered in smooth, flowing designs that seemed to move when they weren't looking directly at them. "These corridors are built for beings about our size," Minho observed, running his gloved hand along the wall. "But look at the doorways. They're wider than human doors, and the handles are in the wrong places." They moved deeper into the station. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows everywhere. The blue crystals embedded in the walls pulsed like slow heartbeats. Their equipment detected no dangerous radiation, no toxic gases, no biological threats. The station was clean and safe, which somehow made it more frightening. "Here," Jiwon called out from ahead. "I found what looks like a data storage room." The chamber was huge, filled with crystalline structures that reached from floor to ceiling. Each crystal was the size of a person and glowed with stored information. Thousands of them lined the walls. Taehyun connected his portable computer to one of the crystals. "These are data cores," he said with excitement. "More advanced than anything humans have built. The storage capacity is impossible to measure with our equipment." "Can you read what's stored on them?" Yunji asked. "I'm trying. The language is completely unknown, but the computers are designed to interface with other systems. They want to be read." Jiwon knelt beside another crystal. "Captain, look at this." She pointed to symbols carved into the base of the crystal. "These marks, they're in human writing. Old human writing from about 800 years ago." Minho studied the symbols. "It says Final Records, Section 7, approved for deletion." "What does that mean?" Before anyone could answer, Taehyun's computer made a successful connection. Data began flowing across his screen in patterns of light and color. The alien symbols gradually shifted, changing into human letters and words. "The translation system is working," he said in amazement. "But this is strange. The records talk about human colonies, human ships, human territories. But they describe events that aren't in any of our history books." Ji-won connected her own computer to a different crystal. I'm getting the same thing. These records mention human settlements that were built 800 years ago, but according to our official history, humans weren't even in this part of space yet. Minho felt his scientific training take over. What else do the records say? Tae-hyun scrolled through streams of translated data. Trade agreements between humans and the name won't translate. Military cooperation, scientific exchanges, cultural programs. It sounds like humans were part of a huge galactic civilization. But we weren't, Yoonji said firmly. 800 years ago, humans barely had faster-than-light travel. We were just starting to explore nearby star systems. According to these records, that's not true, Ji-won said quietly. These documents show humans controlling hundreds of star systems, working with dozens of alien species, building massive space stations, and terraforming worlds. The team worked in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own crystal's data. The more they read, the more confused they became. The records painted a picture of human civilization that was completely different from everything they had learned in school. Here's something important, Tae-hyun announced. I found a section marked Galactic Council Proceedings. It mentions a species that served as mediators for all interspecies conflicts. They were called. The name keeps changing in translation. Sometimes it shows as the listeners, sometimes the peaceful ones, sometimes just empty space where a name should be. Minho looked up from his own crystal. I'm seeing the same thing. References to this species are everywhere, but their actual name seems to have been deliberately removed from the records. Removed by who? Yoonji asked. By humans, Ji-won said, softly. She had gone pale inside her helmet. I found a human military document. It's an order to implement Protocol 7 across all human territories. The order is signed by the Human Colonial Council. What's Protocol 7? Ji-won's voice was barely a whisper. Complete information purge, all records, all databases, all historical archives. They were ordered to delete every mention of this unnamed species, not just from official records, from personal diaries, family histories, even children's school books. The team stood in stunned silence. Around them, thousands of crystal data cores pulsed with their soft blue light, filled with the history that humanity had tried to erase. But why? Minho asked. Why would humans want to forget an entire species, especially one that helped mediate conflicts? Tae-hyun had found another section of records. According to this, the deletion wasn't just about information. There are references to neural adjustment procedures and memory modification protocols. They didn't just delete the records, they deleted the memories from people's minds. Yoonji felt a cold fear growing in her stomach. You're saying humans performed mind control on their own people? Not just their own people, Ji-won said, reading from another crystal. The records mention voluntary participation by allied species in the forgetting process. Whatever happened, it was so terrible that multiple species agreed to have their memories erased. The station's computer system suddenly activated around them. Holographic displays appeared in the air, showing star maps and ship movements. A gentle voice began speaking in perfect human language. Welcome, humans of the distant future. If you are reading these records, then the automatic deletion protocols have finally failed. We hope you are ready to learn what your ancestors chose. To forget. The four explorers looked at each other in shock. The station's AI was speaking directly to them. Who were you? Minho asked the empty air. The AI paused, as if thinking. We were the species that loved you too much. We were the ones who died because you asked us to. And we were the ones who agreed to be forgotten because we understood why you needed to forget. The holographic displays shifted, showing images of beautiful cities and graceful ships. In the images, humans and tall, gray-skinned beings worked side by side, their faces showing joy and cooperation. Our name was removed from your languages by our own request, the AI continued. But if you wish to remember us, we have left you the choice. Everything is here. The complete history of what we were, what we did, and why we had to die. Captain Yoonji Kim realized that her small research mission had just become something much larger and more dangerous. Whatever they had found in this ancient station would change human history forever. Computer, she said formally, we choose to remember. What the archives. Remember, 3 days after the discovery, news of the ancient station spread across human space like wildfire. On the planet New Sol, Hiram Song sat in her office deep beneath the Galactic Archives building. As the archive keeper, she was responsible for protecting humanity's historical records. But something strange was happening to those records. Her computer screen flashed red warnings every few minutes. Ancient files were trying to delete themselves. Security protocols that had been dormant for centuries were suddenly active, attempting to purge specific data clusters from the archives. "This is impossible," Hiram muttered, typing commands to stop the deletion processes. "These files have been stable for 800 years. Why are they suddenly marked for removal?" She pulled up the deletion logs and found something that made her blood run cold. The files being targeted all contained references to a specific time period, exactly the same era that Dr. Park's team had found records about in the alien station. Hiram's assistant, a young man named Semin, knocked on her door. "Ma'am, we're getting reports from archives across human space. They're all experiencing the same problem, automatic deletions of historical records." "How many archives are affected?" "All of them. Every single archive facility from Earth to the outer colonies. The deletion protocols seem to be built into the fundamental archive systems." Hiram felt a deep unease growing in her stomach. She had worked with historical records her entire career, and she had never seen anything like this. It was as if the computers themselves were programmed to forget. Meanwhile, on the planet Busan colony, an old man named Dongyun Kang was having the worst nightmares of his life. He sat in his small apartment staring at news coverage of the alien station, Discovery. The images on the screen showed the gray-skinned beings that Dr. Park's team had found in the holographic records. Dongyun had been having strange dreams ever since the news broke. Dreams of beautiful cities that sang with music. Dreams of tall, graceful beings with mirror-like eyes who seemed to glow with inner light. Dreams of making a terrible decision that made him weep even in his sleep. The problem was, Dongyun had no memory of ever seeing such beings when he was awake. According to his official records, he was just a retired factory worker. He had never served in the military, never traveled to other planets, never had any contact with alien species. But the neural implants in his brain, supposedly installed to help with age-related memory loss, were malfunctioning. Every time he saw the news about the station, the implants sparked with electrical activity, and fragments of buried memories tried to surface. On the planet Daegu, investigative journalist Na Yoon was following the story of the century. She had been tracking Dr. Park's discovery and the archive malfunctions, trying to piece together what was happening. Her investigation had led her to dozens of elderly humans like Dongyun, all with similar neural implants, all experiencing the same strange dreams. "This isn't a coincidence," she told her editor over a video call. "I found nearly 1,000 people with identical neural modifications. All of them are the right age to have been alive 800 years ago if they had life extension." "Treatments." Her editor frowned. "Life extension treatments didn't exist 800 years ago. That's what the official records say. But these people's medical files show treatments that shouldn't have been possible with the technology of that time. Someone has been covering up major advances in human medicine." Na Yoon had also discovered something else troubling. Every person with the neural implants had gaps in their personal history. Missing years where they claimed to have lived quiet, unremarkable lives, but their financial records showed unexplained wealth, and their medical records showed treatments for psychological trauma. Back at the alien station, Dr. Park's team continued their work with the crystal data cores. They had been joined by additional researchers from across human space, all trying to understand the massive historical cover-up they had uncovered. Jiwan Lee had made a breakthrough in translating the alien records. "I've found documentation of the memory modification process," she announced to the research team. "It wasn't just simple deletion. The humans of that era developed technology to selectively remove specific memories while leaving everything else intact." Dr. Park studied the translated documents. According to this, the memory modification was voluntary. People chose to have their memories erased. But why would they choose that? Asked Dr. Yuna Cho, a xenopsychologist who had recently joined the team. Taehyun looked up from his computer interface. I think I found the answer. The alien AI has been slowly releasing more information as we prove we can handle it. Look at this. He projected a holographic display that showed brain scans of humans from 800 years ago. The scans revealed unusual neural patterns in areas associated with emotional processing and social bonding. These humans show signs of severe psychological dependency, Dr. Cho observed. Their brains were literally rewired to require external emotional support. Without it, they would have suffered from depression, anxiety, and inability to form healthy relationships. Jiwon pulled up more records. The dependency was getting worse over time. Children born during that era couldn't develop normal emotional regulation without constant contact with the unnamed alien species. So the aliens were controlling human minds? Dr. Park asked. No, the station's AI responded, its voice echoing through the research chamber. We were not controlling your minds. We were accidentally destroying your independence. The holographic displays shifted to show images of human colonies from that era. The humans in the images looked happy and peaceful, but there was something strange about their expressions, a blank contentment that didn't look quite natural. Your species and ours formed a symbiotic relationship, the AI continued, but it was not healthy. Humans became emotionally dependent on our presence. You could not resolve conflicts without our mediation. You could not feel complete happiness without our empathic support. Dr. Cho studied the brain scans more carefully. The humans of that era were losing their ability to process emotions independently. They were becoming like children who never learned to self-soothe. And that's why the memory erasure was necessary, Jiwon realized. The humans of that era couldn't break free from the dependency while they remembered the aliens. The memories themselves were psychologically addictive. On New Seoul, Hiram's song had made her own disturbing discovery. She had managed to stop some of the automatic deletions and recover fragments of the erased records. What she found in those fragments made her understand why the deletions had been programmed in the first place. The recovered records contained detailed accounts of human psychology during the era of alien contact. Medical reports showed that humans who were separated from the aliens for extended periods suffered from severe withdrawal symptoms, depression, anxiety, and in some cases, complete psychological breakdown. It's like they were addicted to the aliens' presence, she told Semin as they reviewed the recovered files. The records show that human birth rates dropped to almost zero during the later years of contact. People were too emotionally dependent on the aliens to form healthy relationships with each other. Semin looked pale as he read the medical reports. Ma'am, if this is true, then humanity was on the verge of extinction. Not from war or disease, but from psychological dependency. The recovered records also contained something else. Voting, records from the Human Colonial Council. The documents showed that the decision to erase all memories of the aliens had been put to a vote across all human territories. The vote had passed by an overwhelming majority. But the most shocking discovery was in the final set of records Hiram recovered, a document signed by representatives of the unnamed alien species agreeing to their own extinction to save humanity from the dependency relationship. They agreed to die? Semin asked in disbelief. More than that, Hiram said softly. According to this document, they requested it. The aliens realized that their presence was harming humanity, and they asked the humans to kill them all to break the dependency cycle. Meanwhile, Dong-Yun Kang's neural implants finally malfunctioned completely. In his small apartment on Busan Colony, 800 years of suppressed memories came flooding back all at once. He remembered serving as a liaison officer during the alien contact era. He remembered the beautiful beings with mirror-like eyes who could feel every emotion he felt. He remembered how peaceful and happy his life had been in their presence. And he remembered the day the aliens came to the Human Colonial Council with their request. They had discovered that their empathic abilities were slowly destroying human emotional independence. Despite their love for humanity, they asked to be allowed to die to save the human species from psychological extinction. Dong-Hyun remembered voting yes. He remembered watching as the aliens prepared their own ships for destruction. He remembered the tears on their faces as they thanked humanity for allowing them to make the ultimate sacrifice. Most painfully, he remembered volunteering for the memory erasure procedure because the guilt of genocide was too much for any human to bear, even when that genocide had been an act of mercy. As the memories flooded back, Dong Yun wept for the first time in 800 years. He wept for tea. Songs of the Mirror-Eyed Doctor. Sun Wuhan arrived at the alien station 3 weeks after the initial discovery. As one of the galaxy's leading xenopsychologists, he specialized in studying how different alien species thought and felt emotions. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what the research team had uncovered. "Show me everything," he told Dr. Park as they floated through the station's crystalline data chambers. Jiwan Li had spent weeks reconstructing fragments of records about the unnamed species. She had given them a temporary name, the Velnathi, based on ancient sound patterns found in the deepest data layers. It wasn't their real name, but it was the closest human pronunciation could manage. The Velnathi were empaths, Jiwan explained as she showed Dr. Han the translated records. But not just regular empaths who could sense emotions. They could literally feel what other beings felt, as if those emotions were their own. Dr. Han studied the brain scans and psychological profiles that had been recovered. This is extraordinary. Their nervous systems were designed to mirror the emotional states of nearby life forms. They couldn't help but feel what others felt. It gets more complex, Dr. Park added. They didn't just feel emotions. They could influence them. When a Velnathi was calm and happy, everyone around them became calm and happy too. When they were sad, others became sad. The implications were staggering. The Velnathi hadn't just been alien neighbors. They had been living emotion regulators for every species they encountered. "Look at this," Taehyun said, bringing up a holographic display from the station's AI. "I found records of their first contact with humans. The humans of that era were going through a particularly violent period. Wars, conflicts, social unrest. When the Velnathi arrived, all the fighting just stopped." The holographic records showed human planets before and after Velnathi contact. Before contact, the planets showed signs of war damage, pollution, and social chaos. After contact, the same planets were clean, peaceful, with beautiful cities and thriving populations. They didn't conquer us, Dr. Han realized. They healed us. Their presence automatically calmed human aggression and promoted cooperation. But as the team dug deeper into the records, a more complex picture emerged. Dr. Han found detailed studies that the Velnathi had conducted on themselves, trying to understand their effect on other species. "They knew they were changing us," he said, reading through the translated research. "These are scientific papers written by Velnathi researchers, documenting how their presence affected human brain chemistry and social development. The Velnathi had discovered that their empathic abilities created an unintended side effect. Species that spent extended time around them began to lose their ability to regulate emotions independently. Like a muscle that wasn't being used, the parts of the human brain responsible for emotional self-control gradually weakened. It was like a drug," Dr. Han explained to the team. "The Velnathi presence felt so good, so peaceful and harmonious, that human brains stopped producing their own emotional balance chemicals. We became addicted to their empathic influence." Meanwhile, on the planet Andong, Bo-young Lim lay dying, in a hospital bed. She was 847 years old, kept alive by advanced medical technology, and she was one of the last humans who remembered fragments of the Velnathi era without neural modification. When news of the station discovery reached her, Bo-young made a decision that would change everything. She called for Na-young Yoon, the investigative journalist who had been tracking the story. "I need to tell someone the truth before I die," Bo-young whispered when Na-young arrived at her bedside. "I was there when it happened. I was young, but I remember." Na-young activated her recording device. "What do you remember?" "I remember the songs," Bo-young said, her ancient eyes filling with tears. "The Velnathi cities sang, not with voices but with harmony itself. When you walked through their streets, you could feel the music in your bones, in your heart. Everything was in perfect balance." She described a civilization unlike anything humans had ever imagined. The Velnathi didn't build with metal and stone. They grew their cities from living crystal that resonated with emotional energy. Their architecture responded to the feelings of those who lived within it, creating spaces that promoted peace and creativity. They were beautiful, Bo-young continued. Tall and graceful, with skin like polished stone and eyes like mirrors, but the eyes weren't just for seeing. They reflected emotions back and forth. When you looked into a Velnathi's eyes, you saw your own feelings, but calmer, more balanced. What happened to them? Na-young asked gently. Bo-young's voice broke. They loved us too much. That was their weakness and our curse. The Velnathi couldn't stand to see any living being in pain. When humans suffered, they suffered. When we were angry, they absorbed our anger and transformed it into peace. When we were sad, they took our sadness and gave us their joy. But that sounds wonderful. It was wonderful. That was the problem. Bo-young struggled to sit up in her bed. Humans stopped learning how to deal with difficult emotions. Why struggle with anger or sadness when a Velnathi could simply make those feelings go away? Why learn to resolve conflicts when they could mediate for us? She described human society during the height of Velnathi contact. It was a golden age of peace and prosperity, but it was also a time when humans became increasingly helpless without alien support. Children born during that era never learned to soothe themselves when upset. Adults couldn't make difficult decisions without Velnathi emotional guidance. We were becoming children, Bo-young said. Not just some of us, all of us. Human civilization was slowly turning into a species of emotional children who needed alien parents to function. Back at the station, Dr. Han had made a similar discovery, through the alien records. The Velnathi had conducted extensive studies on human development during their period of contact. Their research showed that human emotional evolution had essentially stopped. Look at these charts, he showed the team. Human capacity for independent emotional regulation declined by 70% over the 200 years of contact. Brain. Scans show that the neural pathways responsible for self-soothing and conflict resolution were literally atrophying from lack of use. So, the Velnathi were accidentally making humans emotionally disabled, Dr. Park asked. Not just humans. The records show they had the same effect on every species they encountered. The Velnathi were so good at providing emotional support that other species never learned to provide it for themselves. Gyong Min, the AI archaeologist who had joined the team, made another disturbing discovery. I've found records of Velnathi discussions about this problem. They knew what they were doing to other species, and they were desperately trying to find a solution. The records showed that the Velnathi had attempted various approaches to reduce their emotional influence. They tried limiting contact with other species, developing technology to dampen their empathic abilities, and even relocating to isolated regions of space. None of it worked, Gyong Min reported. Their empathic abilities were too deeply integrated into their biology. They couldn't turn them off without dying. The most heartbreaking records were personal diaries written by individual Velnathi during the final years of contact. They described their growing realization that their love for other species was destroying those species' ability to love themselves. Listen to this, Dr. Han said, reading from a translated diary entry. It says, "We have become a poison disguised as medicine. Every day we remain, the children grow weaker. Every kindness we offer makes them less kind to each other. Our presence is the greatest cruelty we could inflict because it feels like the greatest gift." Bo-young Lim continued her deathbed confession to Na-young Yoon. The Velnathi leadership came to the Human Colonial Council when I was about 50 years old. They had figured out what their presence was doing to us. They asked for a meeting with all the human leaders. What did they say? They asked us to kill them. Bo-young's voice was barely a whisper. All of them. Every single member of their species. They said it was the only way to break the emotional dependency they had accidentally created. Na-young felt her blood run cold. They asked for genocide? They begged for it. The Velnathi leader, I can't remember her name, the memory modifications were too strong. She stood before the entire human council and wept. Not for herself, but for what they had done to us. Bo-young described the meeting in painful detail. The Velnathi had presented scientific evidence of humanity's emotional decline. They showed projections indicating that within another generation, humans would be completely unable to function without constant Velnathi support. She said that true love sometimes means letting go, even when letting go causes infinite pain. The Velnathi loved us enough to die for us. But surely the humans refused. No. Boyoung's tears flowed freely now. The human leaders understood. They had seen the same research. They knew that their children were becoming emotionally helpless. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would accept the Velnathi's sacrifice. Back at the station, the alien AI had been listening to the team's conversations and research. It finally revealed the most painful part of the historical record. "We designed our own extinction," the AI said, its voice filled with ancient sadness. "We created ships that will..." When love becomes poison, Professor Jeho Seo sat in his office at the University of New Earth, surrounded by books about ethics and moral philosophy. The discovery of the Velnathi records had shaken him deeply. As someone who studied historical, moral disasters, he thought he understood how good people could make terrible choices, but this was different. How do you judge a genocide that was requested by the victims? He asked his student, Minji Park, during their weekly discussion session. Minji, who was writing her doctorate about decision-making in extreme circumstances, had been following the Velnathi story closely. "Professor, I don't think we can judge it by normal standards. This wasn't a typical genocide." 3 days later, Minji received a message that changed everything. Her grandmother, Minji Kwan, had been watching the news about the alien station discovery. The elderly woman claimed to have information about the Velnathi era that had never been recorded in any official documents. Minji Kwan was 823 years old and had served as a military commander during the final years of Velnathi contact. Unlike most humans from that era, she had refused the complete memory modification procedure. Instead, she had chosen to keep her memories locked away in classified military archives, accessible only in case of extreme emergency. "I've been waiting 800 years for someone to find that station," the old woman told her granddaughter when they met in the secure facility where she lived. "I knew that someday humans would need to understand what really happened." Minji Kwan led her granddaughter through a series of security checkpoints to a heavily protected data vault. Inside were military records that had been sealed since the Velnathi extinction. "These are the real documents," she explained, activating quantum-encrypted displays. "Not the sanitized versions that were left for history. These contain the actual discussions, the real debates, and the complete truth about why we made the choice we did." The records painted a picture that was even more complex than what the research team had discovered at the alien station. The decision to accept the Velnathi's request for extinction hadn't been made quickly or easily. It had taken 5 years of intensive study, debate, and soul-searching by the human leadership. "Look at this psychological report," Minji Kwan said, pointing to a holographic document. "This was commissioned by the Human Colonial Council in the 3rd year of the debate." The report contained devastating findings about human development during the Velnathi era. Human children born after 50 years of Velnathi contact showed severe emotional developmental delays. They couldn't comfort themselves when upset, couldn't resolve conflicts with friends, and couldn't make decisions without seeking adult approval well into their teenage years. "But the children were happy," Minji Park observed, reading the psychological profiles. "The reports say they were remarkably content and peaceful." "That was exactly the problem," her grandmother replied. "They were too happy. Human children are supposed to experience frustration, disappointment, and conflict. These negative emotions teach crucial life skills. The Velnathi children never learned those skills because they never experienced those emotions." The military records contained even more disturbing information. Adult humans who had lived their entire lives under Velnathi influence were becoming increasingly unable to function in situations that required independent emotional regulation. "Read this incident report," Minji Kwan instructed. A human colony ship was traveling to a new planet when their Velnathi liaison became ill. Without the aliens' emotional influence, the human crew suffered a complete psychological breakdown within 6 hours. The report described humans who literally didn't know how to cope with basic stress without Velnathi support. The ship's captain had become paralyzed with indecision. The crew had argued over trivial matters until they stopped speaking to each other entirely. Several humans had suffered panic attacks when faced with routine mechanical problems. The ship nearly crashed because the humans couldn't function without emotional guidance, Minji Kwan explained. That incident was repeated hundreds of times across human space. We were becoming a species of emotional invalids. Meanwhile, at the alien station, Daeun Jung had arrived to study the Velnati records from a different perspective. As a descendant of one of the human leaders who had voted for the extinction, she carried a burden of family guilt that had been passed down through generations. Her ancestor, Colonial Council member Jung Yun Jung, had left behind private records that were only recently discovered. These documents revealed the personal agony experienced by the humans who had to make the terrible decision. My ancestor wrote that the vote was the hardest decision in human history, Daeun told Dr. Park as they reviewed the family records. He describes meetings where human leaders wept openly as they debated whether to accept the Velnathi offer. The private records showed that the human leadership had desperately searched for alternatives. They had consulted with scientists, philosophers, and even other alien species for possible solutions. "Look at this," Daeun said, pointing to a document dated 6 months before the final vote. They proposed sending the Velnathi to an isolated part of the galaxy, far from any other intelligent life. The Velnathi refused, saying that isolation would be a slower form of death for a species that lived through connection with others. Other proposals included limiting contact to specific times and locations, using technology to dampen the Velnathi's empathic abilities, or gradually reducing their numbers through voluntary sterilization. Every option was carefully studied and ultimately rejected. The Velnathi themselves provided the research that proved none of the alternatives would work. Daeun continued reading. Their empathic influence was too strong and too deeply ingrained. Even limited contact continued to cause dependency in other species. Back at the university, Professor Jeho Seo had been conducting his own research into the ethical implications of the Velnathi extinction. He had discovered something that none of the other researchers had found: records of similar situations in the distant past. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, he told his students during a packed lecture hall presentation. "I've found references to 3 other species in galactic history that faced similar dilemmas. The historical records showed that empathic species were actually quite rare, but when they did evolve, they often faced the same problem. Their ability to provide emotional support was so powerful that it eventually destroyed the emotional independence of other species they encountered. In every previous case, the empathic species chose extinction rather than continued harm to others," Professor Jeho explained. "The Velnathi weren't unique in their decision. They were following a pattern that appears to be an inevitable consequence of overwhelming empathic ability." One of his students raised her hand. "But Professor, doesn't that suggest that the Velnathi's extinction was morally correct? If it was necessary for the survival of other species?" "That's the question that keeps me awake at night," Professor Jeho admitted. "How do we judge an action that was both utterly necessary and completely horrific? How do we process the fact that genocide can sometimes be an act of love?" The military records that Minji Quan had revealed contained one final devastating piece of information. The Velnathi hadn't just requested extinction. They had designed the method by which they would die. They created what they called harmony bombs, she explained to her granddaughter. Devices that would simultaneously destroy every Velnathi across the galaxy in a way that felt peaceful and natural to them. They wanted their death to be consistent with their nature, a final act of empathy that would spare other species the guilt of violence. The harmony bombs had been programmed to activate when Velnathi emotional readings indicated complete acceptance and peace with their decision. The aliens had spent months in meditation and preparation, ensuring that their final moments would be filled with love rather than fear. "They died happy," Minji Quan said quietly. The monitoring equipment showed that every single Velnathi was in a state of perfect emotional tranquility when the bombs activated. They had achieved complete peace with their choice to die for others. At the alien station, the AI had been monitoring the humans' research and emotional responses. It finally revealed the most difficult truth of all. "We made one more request of humanity before we died," the AI announced during a team meeting. "We asked that if our extinction was discovered in the future, the humans of that time would be given a choice." "What kind of choice?" Dr. Park asked. "The choice of whether to complete what we started. We left behind programs designed to teach emotional independence to species who had been affected by our presence. But these programs are difficult and painful. They require confronting negative emotions that we had helped others avoid." The holographic Displays showed complex psychological training programs that the Velnathi had hidden throughout their former territories. The programs were designed to teach humans and other species how to develop the emotional regulation skills they had never learned. Learning these skills as adults is much harder than learning them as children, the AI explained. It requires experiencing all the emotional pain and growth that was avoided during our era of contact. Many beings would choose to the price of forgetting. Dr. Seojun stood before the Council of Worlds, humanity's governing body, holding a datapad that contained the most important research findings in human history. As a bioethics specialist, he had spent 6 months studying the psychological records recovered from the Velnathi station and the military archives. "Honored council members," he began, his voice carrying across the vast assembly hall on New Geneva, "we now understand why our ancestors chose to forget the Velnathi, but we also understand the price they paid for that forgetting." The council chamber was packed with representatives from hundreds of human worlds. For the past month, debates had raged across human space about what to do with the recovered knowledge. Some wanted to restore all memories and records immediately. Others demanded that everything be sealed away again, arguing that some truths were too dangerous to know. Dr. Seojun activated his holographic display, showing brain scans of modern humans compared to scans from before the Velnathi era. These images reveal the cost of our ancestors' choice. Current human psychology shows clear signs of incomplete emotional development. The scans were startling. Modern humans had smaller neural pathways in areas responsible for emotional self-regulation, conflict resolution, and independent decision-making. 800 years after the Velnathi extinction, humanity still showed signs of emotional dependency. We never fully recovered from the psychological changes caused by Velnathi contact, Dr. Seojun explained. Our ancestors erased the memories, but they couldn't erase the neural modifications. We've been living with stunted emotional development for 8 centuries. In the audience, Yeren Bayek, a quantum consciousness researcher, had been studying the recovered Velnathi training programs. She stood to address the council. "Dr. O is correct about our emotional limitations, but the Velnathi left us tools to fix them. Hidden throughout their former territories are psychological training programs designed to teach true emotional independence. The programs Yeren had discovered were unlike anything in human psychology. They used a combination of meditation techniques, controlled stress exposure, and gradual emotional challenges to help beings develop the neural pathways that should have formed naturally during childhood. The training is intensive and sometimes painful," Yeren continued, "but preliminary tests on volunteer subjects show remarkable results. Humans who complete the programs develop genuine emotional independence while retaining the ability to form deep, healthy connections with others." Not everyone in the council chamber was convinced. Representative Hajun Nam from the outer colonies had become the leader of a growing movement that opposed any use of Velnathi technology or methods. "We've lived without this supposed emotional independence for 800 years, Hajun argued when called to speak. "Human civilization has thrived, expanded across the galaxy, and achieved great things. Why should we risk everything on alien training programs that might destroy what we've built?" Hajun's movement, calling itself the Human Heritage Preservation Society, believed that modern human psychology was perfectly adequate. They argued that the emotional dependency patterns were actually beneficial, creating more cooperative and peaceful societies. "Look at our crime rates, our conflict resolution methods, our social harmony," Hajun continued. "We are a more peaceful species than our pre-Velnathi ancestors. Why would we want to change that?" The debate had been raging for weeks, with compelling arguments on both sides. But Dr. Seojun had discovered something that might settle the question once and for all. "Respected representatives," he said, activating another holographic display, "I must share with you the most disturbing finding from our research. Our current emotional limitations aren't just affecting individuals, they're threatening the survival of our species." The new display showed demographic data from across human space. Birth rates had been declining steadily for the past century. Divorce rates were at historic highs. Most troubling of all, an increasing number of humans were choosing to live in complete isolation, unable to form meaningful relationships with others. "We're seeing the same patterns that appeared during the late Velnathi era," Dr. Seojun explained. Emotional dependency that initially promoted cooperation is now becoming emotional isolation. Humans are losing the ability to form deep, lasting bonds with each other. Yerenbeck had been studying this phenomenon as well. The problem is that we never learned to love independently. Modern humans know how to be cooperative and peaceful, but we struggle with genuine intimacy. We can work together, but we can't truly connect. The statistical evidence was overwhelming. Despite having larger populations and better communication technology than ever before, humans reported feeling more lonely and emotionally disconnected than any previous generation. Mental health issues related to isolation and inability to form relationships were reaching crisis levels. Meanwhile, across human space, the Velnathi ruins were beginning to activate. As more humans learned about their existence, the ancient training facilities were responding to human presence for the first time in 8 centuries. On the planet Velnath Prime, formerly the Velnathi homeworld, archaeologist Dr. Kyungjin Yu had discovered something extraordinary. The entire planet was actually a massive psychological training facility, designed to help species develop emotional independence. The cities themselves are teaching tools, she reported to the council via subspace communication. The architecture responds to emotional states and gradually challenges inhabitants to develop better emotional regulation. It's like a planet-sized therapy session. The Velnathi had designed their homeworld to automatically activate when emotionally dependent species arrived. As humans began exploring the ruins, the ancient systems came online, offering personalized training programs based on each individual's psychological needs. The programs are working, Dr. Yu continued. The humans who have volunteered for training here are showing remarkable emotional growth, but the process is difficult and sometimes painful. Some volunteers have asked to discontinue the training. Back on Earth, Dongyun Kong, the elderly man whose suppressed memories had been restored, had become an important voice in the debate. Despite his advanced age, he had volunteered for one of the Velnathi training programs. "I've lived through both eras," he told the council via video link from his treatment facility. "I remember what it was like to live with the Velnathi, and I've experienced 800 years of life without them. I can tell you that neither was complete." Dongyun described his experience with the training program. "The Velnathi era was peaceful but artificial. We were happy, but it wasn't our happiness. It was borrowed from them. The centuries since then have been more authentic, but also more limited. We've been living with only part of our emotional range." "And the training program?" Council President Soyeon Chai asked. "It's teaching me to feel everything: joy, sorrow, anger, love, without needing external support or validation. It's difficult, sometimes overwhelming, but it's real in a way I've never experienced before." As the debate continued, more evidence emerged about the choice facing humanity. The Velnathi training programs weren't just offering emotional independence. They were offering a complete transformation of human psychology. Dr. Seojun had been studying humans who had completed the initial phases of training. These individuals show emotional capabilities that exceed both pre-Velnathi and modern humans, he reported. They can experience deeper love, more genuine empathy, and stronger individual identity than any humans in recorded history. But the training came with risks. Some humans who underwent the process experienced temporary psychological instability as their neural pathways reorganized. A few had suffered what could only be described as emotional overload when they suddenly gained access to feelings they had never experienced before. "The question isn't whether the training works," Dr. Seojun concluded. "The question is whether humanity is brave enough to risk the temporary pain of growth for the possibility of becoming something greater than we've ever been." Yeren Bayek had made another crucial discovery. The training programs contain a fail-safe mechanism. If humanity votes to begin the process, it will be activated across all human worlds simultaneously, but there's no way to stop it once it starts. Every human would be affected whether they volunteered or not. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a choice for individuals, it was a choice for the entire species. Humanity would either remain emotionally limited but stable, or risk everything on a chance to achieve true emotional maturity. Representative Hajun Nam stood again to voice the concerns of those who opposed the training. "This is exactly what happened 800 years ago. The Velnathi offered us emotional gifts that seemed wonderful, but turned out to be harmful. How do we know their final gift won't have the same result? It was a valid concern. The Velnathi's love had been genuine but ultimately damaging. Could their final teaching programs be trusted? Or might they contain some hidden flaw that would only become apparent after it was too late to change course? Dr. Seojun had studied this possibility extensively. The difference is that the Velnathi designed these programs specifically to avoid the mistakes of direct contact, instead of providing emotional epory, the choice to remember. The vote lasted 3 days. Across hundreds of human worlds, billions of people made their choice through quantum-encrypted voting systems. In homes, schools, workplaces, and community centers, humans gathered to discuss the most important decision in their species' history. On the planet New Seoul, 8-year-old Jinseo Yu sat with her parents as they watched the vote counting on their home screen. She was too young to vote herself, but old enough to understand that the adults were choosing something that would change her entire life. What will happen if they say yes to the training? She asked her mother. Her mother, Dr. Yuna Yu, was one of the psychologists who had studied the Velnathi programs. We don't know for certain, sweetie, but it might help people learn to be happier and love each other better. Are people not happy now? Jinseo asked. It was a simple question, but it cut to the heart of the debate. Dr. Yuna looked at her daughter's innocent face and realized that children like Jinseo might be the key to understanding what humanity should choose. Some people are happy, she said carefully, but many people feel lonely or confused about their feelings. The training might help with that. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. The vote had exposed deep divisions in human society that many people hadn't realized existed. Families found themselves split between those who wanted to remain as they were and those who wanted to risk everything for the chance to grow. Elder statesman Kyung Jae-shin, who at 412 years old was one of the most respected leaders in human space, had been chosen to cast the tie-breaking vote if the results were too close to call. He spent the 3 days of voting in meditation, trying to understand the weight of the choice he might have to make. I've lived through 4 centuries of human history, he told his aide as they watched the vote tallies come in. I've seen humanity adapt to countless challenges, but this decision feels different. We're not just choosing a policy or a direction, we're choosing what kind of beings we want to be. Meanwhile, historian Yesul An had been given the task of writing the official record of humanity's choice, regardless of what that choice turned out to be. She understood that her words would be read by future generations, who would judge whether humanity had made the right decision. How do you write about a choice that will determine the future of consciousness itself? She wondered aloud as she prepared her documentation systems. The voting results came in slowly, world by world. The margin was closer than anyone had expected. Heavily populated core worlds tended to vote against the training, preferring the stability of their current psychological state. Frontier worlds and newer colonies voted overwhelmingly in favor, seeing the training as an opportunity for growth and exploration. The deciding factor came from an unexpected source: the elderly humans who had recovered their suppressed memories of the Velnathi era. Despite having lived through the trauma of the original extinction, they voted almost unanimously in favor of beginning the training programs. Dongyun Kang, now undergoing the training on Velnath Prime, sent a message that was broadcast across human space as the final votes were being counted. I've lived through the era of Velnathi dependence, 8 centuries of forgetting, and now the beginning of remembering, his recorded message said. Each phase taught me something different about what it means to be human. The dependence taught me the beauty of connection. The forgetting taught me the value of independence. Now the training is teaching me that true love requires both the ability to connect deeply and the strength to stand alone. His words carried special weight because he was one of the few humans alive who had experienced all 3 states of being. When the final votes were tallied, humanity had chosen to begin the Velnathi training programs by a margin of just 0.3%. Kyung Jae-shin would not need to cast the tie-breaking vote, but the narrow margin meant that nearly half of humanity opposed the decision. President Soyun Chai addressed the species in a broadcast that would become one of the most important speeches in human history. We have made our choice. she announced from the council chambers on New Geneva. By the narrowest of margins, humanity has voted to accept the Velnathi's final gift. But I want to speak directly to those who voted against this path. Your concerns are valid, your fears are understandable, and your voices will be essential as we move forward. The president explained that the training programs would be implemented gradually, starting with volunteers and expanding slowly across human space. No one would be forced to participate immediately, but eventually, everyone would be affected as the programs became integrated into human society. We are choosing to grow, she continued. Growth is always risky, sometimes painful, but it is the essence of being alive. The Velnathi believed we had the courage for this choice. Today, we proved them right. As the announcement spread across human space, the ancient Velnathi systems began activating on hundreds of worlds. Training facilities that had been dormant for 8 centuries came online, their crystalline structures glowing with renewed purpose. On Velnath Prime, Dr. Kyungjin Yu watched as the planet itself began to transform. The ruined cities started rebuilding themselves, not into their original forms, but into new configurations designed specifically for human psychology. It's extraordinary, she reported to Earth. The planet is redesigning itself in real time, creating training environments tailored to human emotional development. The Velnathi didn't just leave us static programs. They left us a living, adaptive teacher. The first humans to enter the newly activated training centers reported experiences unlike anything in human psychology. The programs didn't just teach emotional regulation. They taught the full spectrum of emotional possibility. Dr. Seojun Oh, who had volunteered for the initial trial group, described his experience to the research team. I'm learning to feel emotions I didn't know existed. Not just stronger versions of familiar feelings, but entirely new categories of emotional experience. It's overwhelming, but also incredibly liberating. The training worked by gradually exposing participants to increasingly complex emotional situations while teaching them to maintain psychological balance and independence. Unlike the Velnathi's direct emotional influence, the programs required active participation and effort from the humans. The difference is that we're learning to generate our own emotional stability, Dr. Seojin continued. Instead of depending on external sources for comfort and guidance, we're developing internal resources that can handle any emotional challenge. But the training wasn't without risks. Some humans experienced what researchers called emotional flooding. Temporary periods where their newly expanded emotional range became too intense to handle. Support systems had to be developed to help people through these difficult phases. Jin Seo Yu, the 8-year-old who had watched the vote with her parents, was part of the first generation of children to grow up with the training programs. Unlike adults who had to unlearn centuries of emotional limitation, children could develop true emotional independence naturally. She's different from other children her age, Dr. Yuna Yu observed 6 months after the training began. She can form deep friendships without becoming dependent on them. She can handle disappointment and frustration without needing adult comfort. But she's also more loving, more empathetic than children were before. The children who grew up with Velnathi training showed capabilities that amazed the adult researchers. They could experience profound love and connection while maintaining complete psychological independence. They could feel deep empathy for others without losing their own emotional identity. These children represent what the Velnathi believed humanity could become, Dr. Sun Woo-han observed, beings capable of perfect love without the shadow of dependence or loss of self. As the first year of training progressed, humanity began to see changes that went beyond individual psychology. Crime rates dropped as people developed better emotional regulation. Mental health issues related to relationship problems decreased dramatically. Most surprisingly, birth rates began to increase for the first time in decades. Humans who can love without fear of dependence are more willing to form families and have children, sociologist Dr. Minji An explained in her research report. The training is healing our species' relationship with intimacy itself, but perhaps the most significant change was in how humans related to the memory of the Velnathi. As people developed emotional independence, they found they could remember the extinct species without the overwhelming guilt that had necessitated the original memory erasure. Yesul An, the historian tasked with recording humanity's choice, made a remarkable discovery in her research. We've found evidence that the Velnathi anticipated this development. Hidden in their deepest records are instructions for how to properly honor their memory once humans achieved emotional independence. The instructions described ceremonies and practices designed to remember the Velnathi not as victims of genocide, but as teachers who had given the ultimate gift. The aliens had wanted to be remembered as mentors who had helped humanity achieve its full potential, not as martyrs who had died for human salvation. 2 years after the vote, humanity held its first Velnathi Remembrance Day. Instead of mourning or guilt the celebrati,